Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jack Overneer. I'm acting with Stephen Gockley as the chairperson of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force Steering Committee. It's a little after 11 a.m. on November 3rd, 2022. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Thank you. It seems timely since yesterday was Day of the Dead to think about our ancestors and stuff, for those of you that track that stuff. All right, so the first item, well, very quickly, let's see, we've really got Perry, Mike, Stephen, and I, and Tank, I think you're certainly welcome here. You're not officially on steering committee, is that correct? Okay. All right, but we want your input and participation anyway. So the agenda items we have are the kind of an update on the Justice Project and SAC, IPRTF Communications, which is Jill, something on the annual report, and then items for the next task force agenda and any other business. So is anybody aware of anything that they need discussed other than those items? All right. And I think, Stephen, you might as well give the start with this Justice Project and Stakeholder Advisory Committee update. And I think given the audience, we know many of you are pretty aware of what's going on. So if we're being redundant, let us know.
Yeah. What I will say, and Jack, please add, because I'm sure I'll leave something out. Our community engagement consultants, the VITA agency, is underway with communications with targeted audiences in the community. And that includes tribal members, not necessarily tribal government officials, Latinx community members, and a couple of other targeted groups that the planning team had identified. They are doing this through individual contacts with key informants, connections with people referred by key informants, and focus groups. They're also engaged, and most of you have seen the community survey that's going out mostly through social media. And then independently, the SAC group and the planning team are scheduled to conduct a community-based town hall listening session in County Council chambers on the evening of Tuesday, November 15th. So we're starting, I saw just the other day, to get some very limited feedback from the targeted group members, particularly from a couple of interviews with tribal community members. Not easy to listen to because of the lack of communication over the years with those folks, but valuable to have. We'll see what kind of information is useful in terms of actual specific recommendations that the SAC might be making. And I'm not sure exactly, Jack, maybe you recall the timetable for when the targeted community outreach segment of that will conclude, but it'll be a couple weeks still. Let's see. That's about what I would report on in terms of updates since last time we talked. Jack, what am I leaving out?
Well, I think anybody's welcome to, there's a lot of people here on both. I think as an overview for this particular audience, that's fine. But Arlene, you have a question, go right ahead. You are muted though.
I just wanted to comment that I have seen this information coming over many sources. And so I was very glad to see that the information was going out and coming back at me in so many times. So thank you, who's ever doing all that. This is what we've needed for a long time, and this is a good start.
Thanks, Eileen. Any other questions or comments from other SAC members in our group? Okay.
Okay. Stephen, you want to take the next topic, which is it's Jill, I guess, the IPRTF Communications.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I wanted to give you some updates on where we're at with Pyramid, and I'm going to screen share here for a second. They have their messaging done, except for this one question, and this question was discussed at our last steering committee meeting, but there wasn't a clear answer from the steering committee about your preferred messaging here for the overarching messaging. Do you all remember that discussion vaguely a little bit? And I think for those of you who commented, option A seemed to be the preferred choice. And I'd just like to get some kind of confirmation from you or any other thoughts or ideas you might have on this is going to be the overarching message for the whole effort. And I know there were some comments about substituting a different word besides transforming. So I will remind Sakara and Emily of that as well. And they sent me a draft presentation. They're going to present the final messaging to the full task force at its meeting on whenever is it, the 14th. So do you all have any strong feelings for or against any particular one of these any one of these options that you're seeing here on the screen, or any other thoughts I can pass along? Arlene?
Yeah, I'm the voice of simplicity. I'm trying to see to it that what we say is totally understandable by the general public. You know, amongst us, we understand all these words, but what bothers me is that I want them to hear what they're looking for and what the public has said that they were looking for in the past. It has been the improvement of mental health services, and I'm generalizing there. It's the very broad improvement. And the only words there on the options that indicate that is option D, which I'm not saying that that's the best one. I'm just saying that's the only one that suggests that we're expanding services or addressing that. Public health systems, I don't know what a person thinks when they hear that. I mean, I'd be curious to hear what you all think.
Jack?
Oh, I muted myself. I did it in reverse. I seem to recall Perry, and I've shared this, suggesting we avoid the public health, behavioral health, because people don't understand. I think I did support option A, but I do like option E as well. I also like improving criminal justice and public safety, but for me, I prefer criminal justice to criminal legal. I like public safety. I like including Whatcom County, and I can live with transforming or improving. The only problem with the word transforming is it doesn't always mean it evolves. It doesn't have an inherent quality of improvement.
Right.
So the evolution piece is missing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, because transformation, can typically, you hope it's positive, So, but I do, and I don't know how others feel, but I prefer criminal justice to criminal legal because I think it's broader. And I prefer public safety to public safety systems, public health systems, or behavioral health. So that's where I'm at.
So criminal justice, public safety, and evolve.
Well, the problem with transforming, unless something's added, I think
Right.
it could get lost. That, I mean, you would think in context, people would understand we're trying to transform it positively,
Mhm.
but you never know with a sentence what context it's in.
Sure, sure. Thank you. Stephen,
I'm a little different in some points than Arlene's and Jack's view, but mostly along the same lines, especially with Arlene's point about being able to communicate effectively with the public. I've already heard some concerns about the high level of language and terminology used in the survey we just talked about, and I think this would be important to be clear and ordinary in our language. So I prefer improving to transforming. I think we made sort of a political with a small p decision a while back to use criminal legal instead of criminal justice because of the feelings of or questions about whether justice was yet being served, but I do think that that has a meaning, and I could begrudgingly go along with criminal justice. I don't like A because it speaks, I don't think people know what public safety systems refers to, and I don't think they think of behavioral health services and public safety systems. So I also think people in the public do know what behavioral health means. They mean people who are behaving in unhealthy ways. They don't distinguish whether it's mental health diagnosis or a substance use disorder. So my suggestion would be changing option D to be improving the criminal legal system and behavioral health services in Whatcom County.
thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I think transforming is a loaded word. I think on the political spectrum, people on the right may think that we're trying to let everyone out of jail. People on the left may think that we're trying to keep everybody in jail. It's so subject to interpretation. So I'd say improving is less ambiguous. Improving is making things better. So I think it takes a little bit of ambiguity out of it. And I think criminal justice versus criminal legal makes it a little bit broader. Public safety encompasses behavioral health and other things related to just the general betterment of our community. So I would say the E, but just change transforming to improving.
Okay. Mike?
That's going to be a ditto. So I think I'm following on Stephen's recommendation of taking D and doing improving. Arlene, I just want to say I really appreciate your point in bringing that lens to, what people are going to want to see in there. I would have gone with A until you made your point. And I think you're right. We would be really missing what people want to see, which is talking about mental health. That's what they're seeing on the streets. That's what they're concerned about. And that's what they're assuming is going to be part of the linchpin to making this all work, which is, we know, in part the case. So I would say D, doing improving. And the one thing I had, we don't have tons of folks from law enforcement on here. The word transforming too made it seem to me, there was a moment of like, well, there's something wrong with it. And, I don't know that that's exactly what we want to get across. I hope that improving sits in a spot that's good, because I see it as additive. I see it as wanting to take the parts of our criminal legal system that function extremely well and maybe under really kind of dire circumstances, and I want to improve on it. So I don't know if anybody seeks to comment. I know Chief Tank, you're probably the only person of law enforcement on here, but how does that smack to our members of law enforcement? But I like the word improving instead of transforming, partially for that reason.
Hank, did you want to answer to Mike right quick?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. So I think the word transforming is really a word that people don't know what it means when it's just sitting there without other context. So when you use the word like improving, I think we all know what that means.
Okay.
So just in the simple terms, because, you know, again, if you look at transforming to what, from what, you know, what's the end point, what's the goal? But I think improving, whether we're talking about the criminal, legal, and behavioral health system, or whether we're talking about improving, you know, a coloring book or something, you know, the word is very simple and people understand. So I agree with Mike. Thank you.
Perry?
I'm along with the improving for the previously stated thoughts. I also appreciate Stephen's statement, just because I honestly don't know. We obviously the term behavioral health, you know, I think that it is more commonly known now. I was certainly around in the era when it's like, what is that? You know, as well. So that is probably safe. I don't know if this actually would come into play. It's a little hard to know, but I worry a little bit about public safety and behavioral health. You understand where I'm going here, that public safety related to dangerous mental illness, which is of course not what we're trying to portray. So maybe those are a little bit of different concepts, that is public safety and behavioral health systems, you know, if you will. So I may be confusing it further instead of simplifying it to Arlene's point. But I just wanted to offer that up, that public safety to me means something different than behavioral health, and it isn't encompassed within it. So I'm almost suggesting lengthening it to say including those individual items, if that hopefully makes sense.
So public safety, including behavioral health?
Public safety, comma, you know, behavioral health, etc., laying it out there just a little bit more and ensuring that those topics are separate from each other.
Great, thank you, Perry. Jack?
I think I should just be quiet because all my ideas are coming forward. Yeah, it's good. And you guys like improving. I don't think I've ever thrown a word that was accepted so readily. So you like improving. I like improving criminal justice, comma, public safety and behavioral health in Whatcom County. I think that's good enough. I do think some people don't know what behavioral health is, but I like over the last 5 to 10 years, we've done a much better job of communicating what it is. And so you don't have to dig very deep to understand it. It includes substance use, it includes what we would typically call mental health issues. So I think if we said improving criminal justice, comma, public safety and behavioral health in Whatcom County, that's overarching enough to hit the notes we're trying to hit. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, great. Chief Tank?
Yeah, so, you know, the argument, I guess, if you will, between using criminal legal and criminal justice is really very interesting to me. And I think when I look at criminal legal, we think about the entirety of the system, from policing to courts to, you know, to probation, parole. And when I look at criminal justice, immediately, I think for me, it just goes back to more of a academic standpoint. So as a group, or I don't know who's going to be picking this, but I think once we could get past which one to use, I think we're all in agreement about the behavioral health. So that right now seems to be a big sticking point.
Okay. This is all really helpful. And what I'm hearing, first of all, is universal change from transforming to improving. Jack, did you have another comment or is your hand up? Oh, okay. And then I think, oh, Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here because I think Jack really said it in a very nice way. Using criminal justice, if you say improving criminal justice, comma, public safety, comma, and behavioral health in Whatcom County, improving criminal justice addresses the critique of the criminal justice system by showing we want to improve it. We want to actually enhance the justice part of that. Adding public safety addresses a big pushback to some of the reforms that the task force is working on, the legislature has been working on, and then including behavioral health in there, and not talking about systems, because I think what we found out the last couple of years is it's very hard to move systems. That's our whole problem with behavioral health. So I think if we just say improving criminal justice, public safety, and behavioral health in Whatcom County, we've captured where our focus is in a comprehensive way, in a nonpartisan way, and a comprehensive way.
Thank you, Stephen. So on Stephen's suggestion, is anyone have a concern or is opposed to that if we just make it all inclusive of those 3 terms?
I like all that. I'm still stuck on the legal. I still think that's a more appropriate term, but it's not going to cause me extreme heartburn. I just, as Tank said, I think for me, legal is more encompassing and more broad, and we are really seeking to make suggestions, improvements across the entire spectrum. I do think justice calls forth a lot more notions, good and bad, in people, which may or may not be helpful. So, but I would be fine if that's the will of the group. I would certainly yield. I still favor legal over justice wording, but the rest of what Jack said is wonderful.
Okay, Jack.
Mike, I'm just smiling because you and I share the same goal. And ironically, I have the same feeling about justice versus legal. So I don't know where we ultimately sit in that, but it's ironic, because we're all competent, informed people, but the connotation is obviously different for different people here. So it's interesting. We want the same thing. We just have a different choice of words to get there. It's an interesting dilemma.
Yeah, and I think maybe a possible solution to that dilemma is to suggest to Emily and Sakara that this is a ripe phrase for doing message testing with focus groups and really find out what the community thinks about those terms.
One thing, if this helps, Mike and Hank, I'm asking myself, what's the barrier to legal? We sometimes say we try to keep people out of the legal system. In other words, we want the justice system to keep them out of the legal system. And I'm thinking that may be part of, I'm trying to ascertain where this is coming from for me. But that's part of why I see the justice is broader, the legal is narrower, because I hear the expression, let's keep them out of the legal system, keep them out of the courts, and through diversions and so forth. So if that helps, that's part of where my connotation originates.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Oh, Arlene, you had another comment?
Just a comment about some of the resistance that I suspect will come to us about this bill is from people who are concerned about homelessness. And homelessness is embedded in all the work that we are doing. It's just that we are not saying that we're focused on it. The public is concerned that people are on the streets and out of control in their behavior. And if we can indicate that we are addressing some of those issues, I think some of the resistance will be removed. And I think that, that's very important. But it's a universal issue in this county, I think. And it is part of every report that we've ever done about people needing to be housed. And we are, along with the improvements, that is going to be addressed. There are greater services coming for rental assistance and so forth from the state. It's just that we're not directly focusing on that, but it is a really important, not one-sided issue, you know.
Thank you, Arlene. And thank you everyone for that discussion. That's really helpful. Another question that came up is that Pyramid is putting together some options for visual branding for the task force. And one question from Emily yesterday was, does the steering committee or does the core team feel the need to review those options before the presentation to the full task force at its meeting in next week? Does anyone have a concern about introducing those options, Mike?
No concern, but it seems to make sense that it come here first, but it's not out of a giant concern. It's more like kind of following process. And since that work kind of started here and centered here.
Okay. Thank you. Arlene?
Absolutely, approval should be, within our committee. The symbol that is used for visual is hugely important. So, yeah.
So I understand that. My only concern is that delaying it for this committee to get a preview is going to put it off another month. And that's already into December. So is that pre-approval worth delaying the development of those visual brands a month? Stephen?
My answer to your question, Jill, is no, it's not worth the delay.
Okay.
I don't think we have any particular wisdom on a question like that the task force as a whole has.
Okay.
And ultimately, the task force would want to weigh in on our view of things.
Mhm.
So it just seems like especially given that time pressure, an unnecessary step to me.
Okay.
Couldn't we just rush it through?
Rush it through
Well,
how?
We can't make a recommendation without convening a meeting. And so we'd have to convene the meeting before the 14th.
Okay.
So Arlene, would it be okay with you? I can try and get those options from Sakara and Emily as soon as possible and forward them to the steering committee just so you guys have them and can review them ahead of time.
That
And
would
if
be
any of
great.
you have a concern about having that discussion at the task force or that unveiling at the full task force, you can let me know, and if necessary, we can pull that part from the task force agenda. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Jack, do you have any concerns on that? Jill, is that it for the communications?
Oh, no, sorry. I thought we were waiting for Jack.
Nope.
So just as an update, the Deacon Center for Hope event that Pyramid is centering its branding and its effort around is going to be either January 4th or 5th. So stay tuned for that. It will coincide with the 2nd anniversary of the opening of the center. And Perry, I've passed on your concern about the naming of the center to Emily and Sakara and asked them to address it at the full task force meeting.
Yeah, to clarify, I had just shared with Jill, and I don't think I talked about it, within the committee, but I love Ann Deacon. Worked for a number of years in different capacities and actually in different jobs. And I'm so proud of her and happy, just in regard to the ordinance and the naming. In terms of utilizing that name when I'm in my business mode, my concern is that it's not clear what it is. So I wouldn't say to a person, hey, I need, withdrawal management services. I wouldn't say, go to the Ann Deacon Center for Hope. I would say the Crisis Stabilization Center is located at 2026 Division Street. You know, this is their number, etc. So I'm just worried about confusion. And I don't know, I don't have an answer. I really honestly try and bring solutions as opposed to, you know, concerns in that regard. And maybe it won't be, maybe I just haven't considered it. So thanks.
Maybe you could use the current title with a smaller print underneath saying crisis stabilization maybe in a large amount of the communication, maybe not in everything, but sometimes things have a secondary description.
That's exactly what the coordinating team suggested.
Oh.
They wanted to emphasize the name alone, and we had the similar concern that you had, Perry, quite appropriately, I think. So I hope it'll be Ann Deacon Center for Hope, comma, a crisis stabilization center or something like that.
Jack?
I think there's a lot of precedent with how buildings are named or referred to people. I'm thinking of campus buildings and law schools and different things. And really what tends to happen in the public is more crisis stabilization center or the math building, the law building, this building. And I think, Perry, you're probably more than perhaps anyone in the county uniquely situated to advocate for what works best to reaching out to the community. And I would tend toward, in much of the dissemination, referring it to the Crisis Stabilization Center, known as formerly named the Ann Deacon Center of Hope, or the Ann Deacon Center of Hope is our Crisis Stabilization Center. But I think for common usage, I would refer it to the Crisis Stabilization Center, because yeah, that's what will help people find it, and it's what Ann would want, as a matter of fact. So those would be my thoughts. But I think what you do now is really important, because this is just rolling out. You're the first one with it, and institutions and governments and just people, we tend to copy what's been done before. 5 years from now, well, that's how we've always done it. So I'm glad you're being thoughtful and trying to figure out how to navigate it. But that would be my basic thought on it. Like Arlene said, whether it's a secondary name or a primary name, but the secondary name of crisis stabilization is the one in common reference. I think that's obviously to the benefit of the people we're trying to help.
Yeah, and I will report that in my conversations with Emily and Sakara, they both have said that is what they plan on doing, is Ann Deacon Center of Hope, comma, a crisis stabilization center. So what you guys are suggesting is what they're planning, but I'll let them explain that in more detail at the meeting during their presentation. And I think that's all I have for IPRTF Communications, unless anyone has any other questions or concerns. Stephen, you're muted.
I thought I was unmuted. I'll just encourage everybody on this call, when they present to the task force, to reinforce this emphasis that we want to make, so that the reference to the center is understood by lay people in the community. Because my perception is there's been a little bit of tension within the discussions with Pyramid. They have a strong commitment to branding and to identifying one sort of crystallizing example of the work of the task force, and they've picked on the Crisis Stabilization Center. They think that really shows the accomplishments that we have so far and the changes we've made, and they think this is the perfect opportunity, perfect point in time to brand it with the new name. So they have been a little resistant to our expressions of those concerns. I think I'm glad to hear Jill say they've so fully endorsed that, but I don't think that came easily. And so if they hear from other people who share that same emphasis, that we want it to be something that the average person can refer to offhand without thinking who the heck was that named after, I think that'll help them as they set about with their communications.
The most important word in that title is hope. That's the thing that will grab people, not Ann Deacon, although she deserves plenty of credit for the establishment of that organization. But this is, we're looking for, PR is hooks. They're looking for hooks that are going to impact people. And that word is terribly significant.
Thank you, Arlene. Anything else? No? Okay, that's it for pyramid.
Okay, Jill, you are next with the annual report.
Yes, thank you. The annual report, again, I'm going to screen share. I don't know, have any of you had a chance to take a look at the packet of what I sent around last week of the draft report? Stephen? Yeah, Mike? Okay, let me screen share here just for a sec.
Bill was cursor. I didn't dig into it, but I will, as I always do, and I'll provide you with hopefully something useful.
Perfect, thank you. And I just have a few outstanding questions. I'm not going to go through it all and have you read it on screen. Unless you want me to, I'm happy to do that. If you want to spend time doing that, just let me know. But I do have a few outstanding questions, and I'll just go over the topic areas that were chosen for each section. And the first section, of course, is the full task force and steering committee. I included the description of the steering committee and its role. The 2022 update items are guiding the work of the SAC, working on developing the racial equity implementation plan, contracting with Pyramid, the naming ceremony. Hopefully that'll, I might need to change that as we've moved that from December to January. So I might move this section down to what's next in 2023. And again, or adopting the BEGAT sim. And if any of you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand and interrupt me. What's next in 2023 is continuing the racial equity implementation plan, more work with Pyramid. And this is one outstanding item that I have a question about. At the last steering committee meeting, there was a discussion about working with Representative Rule and Joe Valentine to begin strategizing on advocating for better Medicaid and MCO reimbursement rates, right? That was, and the idea was that Behavioral Health Committee would meet with Representative Rule and Mr. Valentine and committee to start the process for strategizing, which they did. And then that strategizing session would then move to the full task force meeting. Dan and Mike, you can speak to this. The behavioral health meeting with Representative Rule and Joe was very, very enlightening and useful. So my question is, do you want that to stay in behavioral health, or do you want to go ahead and move it to the full task force? Representative Rule's direction was to come up with a wish list of items that she can use then to begin her work at the for her next steps. So my question is, how do you want this particular topic to be reflected in the year-end report? Any thoughts or ideas? Stephen?
Sorry. I think this should stay. I think it should reflect a role for both. I think the wish list is best generated, at least in a draft form, out of behavioral health. I think that's a great group to be doing that. In addition, I've had a couple of conversations with Jackie, which I think she's shared with Perry, and those two, and they were kind enough to invite me to talk to some of the behavioral health providers about rate setting, because that's been one of the sort of the obstacles in some of this, and that's sort of on a level of detail that I don't think it's a wish list kind of level of detail, nor is it exactly at this point a legislative matter. But I think ultimately a lot of this work that will go on in the Behavioral Health Committee or in work groups within that will come up to the task force level. So when you're talking about 2023, I think both bodies are involved, and I think we ought to reflect that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mike?
Stephen said basically exactly what I was going to say, although I might differ, Stephen, with one piece that there isn't a space for legislative push about the way those things are calculated. Those things seem so deeply embedded in there. I think without that type of pressure, I don't think we would see any change in actuarial figuring and the way those things are cooked. I just, before that came out from Joe, I don't think a lot of us even knew. Of course, I'm not skilled in Medicaid reimbursement rates for behavioral health services, so that is a big part of it, is my naivete. But I would just say that we keep that on our list, because I think if nothing else, things that can get generated from legislative pushes include like studies being done, things like that can end up driving change. So anyways, but I really appreciate what you said, Stephen. And I just want to say, accept the onus. I think from Dan and I's standpoint, I think at least drafting something for our behavioral health subcommittee to look at next time for our meeting would be something that I personally want to take on to try to encapsulate what we got from that meeting into the beginnings of a wish list, and just acknowledging that regardless of the outcome of any election, we're going to work with whoever, and really appreciate Representative Rule and their work, but we're going to work with whoever we get, and we're going to push for the same thing. So it's, for me, it's less tied to the person and more to the fact that we've got champions in the 42nd, and whoever gets elected, we want them to hear us and to work with us.
Mike, I accept your friendly amendment about the value of legislative advocacy. So I think you're right about that, and I think that might even call on the steering committee giving some more thought to that, because we've never really undertaken any sort of ongoing legislative advocacy. We've weighed in on an opinion at a certain point in time, but more of a campaign is not something we've thought through how we might organize that, where we might make decisions and carry them out.
And Stephen, just to add to that, who do we team up with, right? Who else is aware of these things? What other groups across the state or behavioral health groups are really looking at the same thing? And I might pick Perry's brain too, on what he knows and what might be good pathways, or who to team up with.
Perry?
It's a little bit of a rabbit trail here, but I was also in that behavioral health subcommittee meeting, and I'd heard earlier that the method of actuarials that is used within the state of Washington to figure percentages and et cetera of Medicaid is fairly sophisticated. As a matter of fact, Joe Valentine briefly described it, and I think he described it pretty well, and I still didn't grasp it. But the short version of this is I understand that at this point anyway, that even the 7% increase is not actually going to reflect additional dollars to the providers. I think that it's really important that we understand what the heck how it was that happened, literally. And I think that Joe Valentine is a great person to maybe consider bringing back and saying, talk a little bit more about that, or get into some of those details, because I think it's those kinds of things, the necessity to understand that, to then really know what we're advocating about, because you can advocate for increased rates of Medicaid, and half of zero, I'll get my calculator here, ends up still being zero. So I just offer that thought.
All right, that's so spot on. And I'm just gonna take a stab that the legislators that voted for that, when they learn what happened, they're not going to be happy, because it almost thwarts legislative intent. right? It's not exactly, but it's really, we're at cross purposes with one another, and we shouldn't be. And so sometimes some of those things that are Byzantine, we need to unearth, figure them out, and possibly, suggest some reform so that we're able to make a meaningful difference. This has been, Jill talking about the annual report, maybe think about this, but the letter that we wrote to the Whatcom County that the task force stood behind included workforce issues, right? Part of what we acknowledge for workforce issues is pay. So this task force has been pushing for this for a while now, and got, I guess you could argue, right? Legislators heard us, said, let's do an increase, and we're actually not getting one. So I think it's just natural that we don't give up. We'd be a terrier with a newspaper, if you accept my analogy, and we don't let go of that newspaper.
Arlene?
Yeah, I think part of our purpose is to find out where the obstacles are to the goals that we are recommending, the things that we're recommending. And that was like, that discussion revealed an obstacle, a really important financial obstacle. And money is one of the issues we have to constantly be looking at that. And especially the biggest and the largest sources of where the money can come from. So everything we want needs money. And so, that particular piece was really important to be paying attention to. And then another thing I thought of was that an organization that will be interested in this issue and may provide extra support would be NAMI. They're looking for the expansion of services for their members and for people in general. So they might be a good group to connect with.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jack?
Just a quick reminder that when we move forward with the Crisis Stabilization Center, both the task force and county officials and everyone, I mean, it was a real leap of faith to do that operating money. Sharon Shoemake helped us get that first million and other things, but just a reminder that the task force is already committed to, I mean, I know that I'm referring specifically right now just to crisis stabilization, but I think it extrapolates out to the entire workforce issue. We have a pattern of saying we have to advocate for this, and we have to do a little bit of a leap of faith, meaning when we did that, we didn't have total certainty we could keep funding beyond a certain point. So I think it's very consistent with what we've already agreed to do.
Great, thank you. So what I'm hearing is to keep the rural wish list in behavioral health, to develop that out further, and then it will of course eventually go to full task force. Yeah. And then I'm hearing to keep as a separate item the issue of the actuarial methods for determining provider rates on the table, as well as a separate issue. And unless one of you want to, I will reach out to Joe Valentine and let him know you are interested in exploring that further and see what he recommends. Who can we involve in that conversation? Who would know? Who can, what's the right path to take to first learn about it and then to advocate for it? And so that will be a separate issue. How does that sound?
So to clarify, just super quickly, Jill, I think that what we're talking about is the state's method of estimating Medicaid. And those actuarials, with Joe, and Joe Valentine may have, some really specific suggestions if it isn't him. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Jill, I'd like to jump in and say, at the level of the year-end report, I think the proper focus would be to say, we're going to continue to look at financial aspects of expanding service capacity and workforce adequacy. That'll incorporate reimbursement rates. But I don't think we know enough to be too specific about that yet.
Right, right. Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree.
I'd also like to suggest that before we invite Joe, I'd like to have a side conversation with Perry and Jackie first about at least sketching out some strategy for that and how we fit Joe into that and whether there's anybody else we can come up with or so that we're on the same page when we reach out to people.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Stephen, I was going to suggest the same, and I wondered if Perry on the fly might know of somebody locally that might be good to bring to a conversation who might join us. You know, I'm thinking maybe Jenny Billings, like Wacom, or, you know, somebody who from that side of it that could bring some other perspective in a planning meeting. But I agree, Stephen, that would be useful. I would volunteer. I'm strongly interested actually to be there.
I will say we have an attendee that I'm assuming is Jackie with a hand raised. Do you want me to promote her and allow her to speak to that?
Yes,
Jackie, are you
yes,
there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, so you can't tell it's me, huh? I don't know why that is. Anyway, yeah, I just had a couple things to say. One is that, in my opinion, and I've worked with the state probably 3 or 4 times on rate setting and specifically Medicaid and non-Medicaid rates for behavioral health agencies. And in my opinion, and this is just an opinion, if the state doesn't see that they have the budget or doesn't want to do it, then that's the result of the evaluation. The result of the evaluation will reflect that fact. And so so I believe this is in part the state not wanting to do this. And I don't know, I think we would need to talk with Alicia about how to get around that a little bit, and maybe a little bit Joe too. But I also wanted to say that before, Perry doesn't know this, but in my prior years, probably the first 15 years that I worked with the county, I did a fair amount of talking with legislators, state legislators, and one of the things we learned about was a one-page sheet, developing a one-page sheet with talking points, and just 2 or 3 points that we wanted to make, and not making it too much, not making it over their heads, making it really simple, that kind of thing. And then the last thing is, yeah, I'm pretty interested in this topic too, so I definitely want to be working on it as well.
Thank you, Jackie. Anything else on this? No? Okay. Moving on, committee updates and next steps, behavioral health, filling gaps in the behavioral health workforce, which is what we just talked about. Program review, the RIC that we talked about, Grace and lead, what's next? Develop solutions to the behavioral workforce crisis, that's what we just talked about. Continue to monitor alternate response program data. This section is a little bit technical, so Perry, I might have you take a look at this section offline just to make sure I don't make any egregious misstatements here. Legal and Justice System Committee, continue to monitor DV offender treatment. Program reviewed inmate communication. The pretrial processes work group effort and what's next. This is from Maya and Eric exploring the viability of using mental health sentencing alternatives. I need to run this past them. Reentry, existing services, needs and gaps. DV and DUI options. And more pretrial processes work group. The Crisis Stabilization Center Committee, just reviewing the census, monitoring involuntary certification status, monitoring effort to streamline law enforcement drop-off protocols, and the same for what's next in 2023, more of the same. Perry, you did mention connecting with Prosecutor Ritchie about the 12-hour holds, and it occurred to me that you're welcome to do that if he's there at the task force meeting, if you haven't had a chance to connect with him yet. So
I'll certainly do that, Jill. I think I'll obviously I'll send him an email, just sort of
Yep.
following up as well, just, yeah.
And continuing to increase use, continuing to monitor data and procedures and policies. The joint meetings, we've separated that out since they're 4 times a year. Various program reviews have occurred. There was a discussion on mental health sentencing alternatives. What's next? Continue to monitor programs. Continue to identify and review reentry services needs and gaps. And this is, I think this conversation will be fed from the documents from the BGAT needs and rec services that's coming from the Justice Project. Mike, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Joe. As you were going through this, and it kind of combines 2 items, and I wanted to see from steering if this rose to the level to be called out as a special mention. And I'm not sure if it was in a SAC meeting I was in, or maybe our behavioral health committee. Somebody had brought up, this is not my idea, but I'm going to champion it, that in other communities, for somebody re-entering the community after being discharged from jail, they essentially get a book. They get a list of services, and it was made very clear to us that we have no such resource for people. And I remember in the Christy Sleddy conversation, she was talking about the RIC, and one of the things that it might provide is kind of that kind of connection, repository of information, of helpful information. But did this rise to any of the steering committee members into a level of importance that should be called out separately? And I don't really know what that would be, maybe a reentry handbook or reentry guide, but it seems to me, I don't know if it's too granular, but it seems to me to be a really important value add that the task force, if we agreed to get behind to work with, maybe it could be an outcome for 2023. But I don't know if it deserves special mention beyond what Jill just mentioned. Jill, thank you for stopping there, because you were at a perfect spot. You're talking, continue to look at reentry gaps, right? Well, this is identified. Is it worthy of calling out? Should we champion it? And I'll stop there.
Mike, I'm happy to put 2 or 3 sentences about that as a possible something to look at in 2023. I'm happy to add that. Does anyone else have any response to Mike's suggestion? Arlene?
Yeah, I think it would be valuable to have it. I don't want to add more work on everyone's load as it is, but even more important would be the support navigators to assist that process. It's insufficient to have a brochure and not have support people involved because this population really needs that. And that I think it's coming, because I'm seeing that funding at the state level, and this is coming from being on the North Sound Behavioral Health ASO board, is funding more and more programs for, especially they're emphasizing peer support. And so this is coming, and that will be very important, along with books and brochures.
Stephen?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mike and being intrigued by that notebook kind of resource being available. And I completely agree with Arlene about the value that navigators could provide. Both of those are resources for that transition to make reentry into the community successful. At the same time, I'm going to go back and say, this is within the context of a year-end report. And I think those are 2 possibilities that we haven't really vetted, explored, fleshed out in committee work. So I definitely think we ought to work on both of those as possibilities, but I think I may tend to take Mike up on his suspicion that both of those might be a little too granular for inclusion in a year-end report. There are things that we definitely can work on, but it's up to the subcommittee to decide to work on them and then do that work. And then we can report on them later.
So I think what I would like to do is take a good look at the BGAT's needs and recommendations document and see if those two specific suggestions fit within what they have, any of the needs and recommendations they've identified. And then, like you say, Stephen, just include those suggestions in what I've already written here for the year-end report, and maybe say something like, for example, there is some interest in looking at this as an option, or this as an option. And then just leave it at that. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Any other suggestions or thoughts about that? Okay. And that's it. Caleb's not here for index. Produce data for the Justice Project Stakeholder Advisory Committee. That was the big project in 2022. And then in 2023, continue with data dissemination, system upgrades, updating the data matrix. My last question as attachments for the year-end report is to include the SIM that the task force adopted. Are there any other attachments you can think of that you might want me to include in the year-end report? No, nothing?
Jill, we're not going to have any outputs yet from our media consultants, are we?
That's what I was wondering too. Yeah.
Because if we did, it'd be great to have an example, even if it's early work or an infographic, if there is anything, and maybe
Okay.
that'll be like the.
You know, maybe a copy of this, the launch of a splash page for the website. That's available, isn't it?
No, we don't have any visuals or websites, any of that yet. And I can definitely add something like that. It's only early November, so we do still have 2 more months in the year that I can fill in more information as it comes through. But that's a good suggestion, Mike. I can add an attachment on any pyramid outputs. And I think we're close to having the messaging done. So that would be a good attachment to include. Perry?
So a couple of questions, Jill. I think it's great to include the sequential intercept model. I'm backtracking here just a little bit. The one that I sent to you, and I think it's been adopted, it was titled Behavioral Health Gap Analysis Team, as opposed to Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force. Just making sure that the title is right, given the adoption or readoption or whatever the right terminology there is. And I could ask this offline, Jill, but I've been working on just some suggestions relative to the Crisis Stabilization Center year-end report. I don't know what the deadline is, and I know you told me already.
I think we're good. I'm still, this is still draft and we've got another month and a half. So if you've got some changes, Perry, I would say get them to me before the next steering committee in December. How does that sound?
Yeah, they're really minor. Just
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't late.
No,
Thanks.
I appreciate that. You do very well at really digging in and making sure everything's good to go. So I appreciate that input from you very much.
Glad you said that publicly and that it was recorded. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you, Perry. Stephen?
Jill, the SIM update was one piece of the BGAT's work and reporting to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. The other one was a fairly extensive presentation on criminal legal data that Caleb and Jeremy Morton and others did. So it seems that we could that would be relevant. I mean, I know that'll be coming out somehow in the SAC recommendations, but it's also something that a lot of task force members in the same way were involved in developing, and I wonder if that would be relevant information to attach to this.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, so I will check with Kathy. Tell me again what exactly it was.
It was SAC meeting number 2. It was a criminal legal data presentation that Caleb and Jeremy Morton.
Okay.
There's a pretty extensive slide deck that Jeremy put together.
Do you want the whole slide deck in as attachment, or is there? We can
I
talk
don't know.
about it
I'm
offline.
throwing out the idea more generically than I
Yeah.
am.
Okay, I'll connect with you offline and we can figure that out.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll look.
I mean, I guess I don't know what others think about including that. I'm offering that as a possibility. Mike's on board.
Okay, excellent. Anything else?
Just backtracking just a moment, I really agree. I think that Jeremy's and Caleb's information is amazing. Some of Jeremy's slides are really thick. So I just caution that it's, or maybe I'm just slow on the uptake, but just, which slides, that they make sense, that it's like, if it's not clear, again, I'm back to that, simplistic communication.
Sure.
Concept.
Right. I will get the deck from Kathy Polka and take a look at it and see how we can make it more user friendly and relevant to the task force's year-end report and get back to you.
I'm definitely with Perry there. We were all sort of gasping for air looking at some of those. And
Right. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you guys. That's everything that I have for the year-end report.
Thank you, Jill. Stephen, you want to take this to the end at this point? You'll have to unmute though.
okay, first task done, unmuted. So the next agenda item is topics for the next task force agenda. Jill, you have one bullet, develop solutions to behavioral health workforce crisis.
Yeah, and that was the conversation we had earlier about when that item comes to task force. So it sounds like I'll remove that from the November meeting as it's not quite ready for prime time yet.
I think that's right.
Okay.
And Mike, you have your hand up.
This is not pertinent to your agenda topic, Stephen. This is outside of that, so I can wait. Or I can go now if you like.
Yeah, I think Jill just didn't take her hand down. That's the only other.
Actually, I've got a few. I do want to nail down the agenda if
Okay.
we can.
Let's do those and I'll come back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. How much time do you want to allot on the agenda for pyramid? That's my first question. The items that I have on the agenda right now for November are pyramid. Emily and Sakar will be there, so that'll be our first presentation to the full task force. Number 2, Justice Project Needs Assessment. We still need to ask the full task force whether or not the Law and Justice Council, they as the Law and Justice Council, want to vote on the needs assessment final recommendation at its meeting in January. And then the third agenda item I have are the poll results, the SAC poll results on the needs assessment and the vision value statement. So Marty Solomon is going to attend the full task force meeting and give a brief presentation on those results. So my 2 questions, how much time to allot to pyramid? I'm thinking start them out at a half an hour. But we've got, I think, some wiggle room. If they go a little bit longer, it would be okay.
And I'm being quiet, Stephen, because I'm gone for that meeting. You're going to be on your own. I mean, I can offer stuff, but you're going to be sharing it on your own. So my input's perhaps less valuable than it might be.
No, I don't think that diminishes the value of your input at all, Jack. So any opinion you have on, amount of time would be welcome.
Well, my overarching opinion is whatever we said is completely I mean, we've got topics that'll be 15 minutes, went an hour, and we've allotted an hour and it's been 15 minutes. So I think the main thing is flexibility. I would say a minimum of 30 minutes for pyramid, and that may be short depending on the questions and how long. How long is their presentation, Joe? You say,
They haven't said, they're asking how long they have. So they're gonna be unveiling the final messaging, they're gonna be unveiling visual branding, and they're gonna be talking about next steps.
so that's at least 20 minutes
Yeah.
and probably another 15 or 20 minutes of questions, I'd guess.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Anything else?
and I agree with Jack. I would give them at least 30 minutes, maybe 45.
Mm,
And I would ask them to sort of give us a little bit of the thought process that got them to what they're showing us. You know, because they're pretty careful and thorough and professional, so it would be valuable to understand, you know, how they came to the conclusions they came to.
In terms of messaging,
Yeah.
okay. Anything else then for the agenda for the full task force meeting? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Jill, I'll just note that you know, there's the SAC planning meeting this afternoon, so I can't even remember right now, but one or two of the things you mentioned could be tweaked a little bit pursuant to those conversations. I think. Like the polling results and stuff.
Okay, I won't be at that meeting most likely, or I will be at the very tail end of the meeting. So
Okay,
maybe when you're there today, you can hopefully suggest that those items can be discussed towards the end of the meeting, and I'll try to hop on. I've got
Okay.
a
And-
double
and-
booking at that time, so.
okay, and otherwise you can just cross-check with Kathy after the meeting, see where we got with it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mike, you're up.
Okay, thanks for that. So really quick, this is almost good of the order, but it's really about steering composition and makeup. And it's a thought that I had, you know, obviously Chief Tank being here has been really helpful because we've got somebody from law enforcement. And I know that Caleb is normally here and he's here because of his role as chair of the index committee. Is that correct?
Correct.
But it just occurred to me that this group is behavioral health heavy, which is super, and it's really neat. But, you know, I don't know if we have ever created guidance, if there is guidance around the composition of the steering committee beyond, you know, chair, co-chair, Barry as kind of council sponsor. And I just had two thoughts. One, I think having law enforcement present in our conversations as a contributive and collaborative partner, I find incredibly valuable. And I think it's one of the powers of the task force. So it's almost a question / suggestion. The second piece was with racial equity. As folks know, I bang the drum a lot. I am not the best champion of that. But I am here and I will continue banging the drum. And might we look at, for steering, to have somebody in the leadership of the task force to be able to embody or champion that particular issue? Maybe that be a staff person within the county government, maybe that be a citizen representative. But just, I guess, two ideas, questions / suggestions for leadership of the steering committee of this group. Might there be some additions that could be beneficial going forward?
So I think those are thoughtful points, Mike. We have sort of formally constituted the steering committee as the committee chairs, but I think what you raise is a question of whether we should reconsider the guidelines for composition of that. And so I think that's worthy of one or more conversations. And Jill, I wonder if you could put that on the next steering committee agenda to at least start that conversation, decoupling us perhaps from the chair heavy composition. The other is, Mike, I've been meaning and have been unproductive so far, but will be very shortly in trying to kickstart the reconstituted racial equity work group. So let's talk about racial equity suggestion, part of your idea, in that context first, because I hope we can get together fairly soon, and then bring that back to steering committee as well. Jack?
Again, I was unmuted. I know I periodically bring this up. I think a slight bit of history to get us to where we are today might be helpful here. In the early days of the task force, the entire agenda was set by Jill and I. And we were working with a outside consultant at the time. It was Waha, and there were some things we worked through to try to construct that. We also had pressures from different committee members and stakeholders wanting to be on the agenda. There was a lot more desire to be on the agenda than we had time on the agenda. So Jill and I went to Ken and said, we need a steering committee or something. We don't want to be the ones having to make all these decisions. We want more people involved in what's on the agenda. And we also really needed, particularly we had one group in particular that wanted to be on every agenda with a very focused message. And that message deserved to be heard once, but it probably wasn't appropriate for every agenda. And they were very vociferous in their advocacy to be on every agenda for a while. So that's how it started. And it was like Ken and Jill and I, and then we added the co-chairs because that just seemed logical. And whether it's been formalized from the perspective of any kind of written materials, I don't know. It's possible. For a long time, we were definitely not a decision-making body. I mean, Jill, we talked about that a lot. We would make recommendations, but the decisions would be made at the task force. So that's sort of our history. And I'm not saying that's where it should continue necessarily, but that's how it got here. And it was an extremely valuable tool for facilitation to have some of the individuals most active in the task force assisting at the time the co-chairs in determining what was on the agenda. And it's like now, you know, Stephen and I don't even really have to set the agenda. If we have something on there we want, sure, it's part of the mix and it's probably there, but it's this group doing it, which I think is a far more inclusive and cooperative and better process than just a couple people trying to sort it out and irritating people. I mean, now if somebody is clamoring to get on and they're not on, then, you know, we can say, well, we brought it to the steering committee and they chose not to. So, well, I think it's fine to look at what role it might be. That's how we are where we are.
Chief Tang.
Yes, I just wanted to make a clarification that I'm not on the steering committee. I'm just here as a guest and an interested party.
And a welcome guest at that.
Very, very welcome. I kind of like the informal part of it, Tank. I'm glad you're here when you asked about it. In some ways, on a personal level, I kind of like the informalness of it. And we let Tank participate, whoever wants to be here. It's somewhat working, but if we need something more formal, I'm certainly open to looking at that as well.
Jill, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would just suggest thinking and being very clear about the boundaries between the steering committee's role and the roles of the other committees, particularly legal and justice, particularly behavioral health, and particularly the joint behavioral health and legal justice, right? So I understand, and I'm not at all opposed to including someone with a law enforcement background on steering committee, but I would say defining those boundaries for all the committees would be helpful to me in knowing how to create the agendas, right? And what goes where. And that's just my personal request and thinking about committee membership and makeup.
And some of the answers to the questions Mike raised depend to me on, I mean, I think you see from Jack's historical description that we function a little bit differently in a little bit different domains than originally. It's not just an agenda setting kind of body. We vet ideas, we give priorities to ideas, we sort of endorse some investigative or inquiry activities. There's more substance going on in our discussions in steering committee now than there might have been before. So, you know, who's taking part in those conversations? It might be valuable to have some differences from what it started out as, but at the very least, those are all worthwhile things to me for us to talk through, and that's why I suggested we sort of start a conversation along Mike's lines next time. And Jill's suggestion that we think about whether we want to sort of clarify the focus and the membership of the other committees as well could be a good addition to that.
So I will add that to the full task force agenda for November.
No, the steering committee agenda.
Oh, steering committee agenda for December?
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting.
Okay.
But I'm sorry I interrupted you, Jill.
No, that's good because I was under the impression you wanted on the full task force agenda. So. Thank you.
Okay.
Stephen, would it be your understanding that the primary purpose of the steering committee includes setting the agenda, but also trying to establish overarching priorities for the task force as a whole? Because that's kind of, I think, where we've ended up, as I would describe it. I'm not saying we shouldn't add more, but I'd hate to lose those two functions. Like, I think those two functions are critical.
No, I agree with that. And the only thing I would add is to emphasize what you said before, Jack, is I still think we're a body that makes recommendations to the task force, not a body that makes decisions for the task force.
Right, exactly. The task force makes the decisions. We're framing it. It's kind of like an executive committee that's framing and trying to kind of weed things down. But I think I know from not having had it, it's a lot better to have it for the agenda. And I think it's a lot better to have here the discussions about, hey, where are we headed? What's our long-term plans? What are we trying to align toward? And then letting the subcommittees do the perhaps the work of that, but we're kind of setting the strategic goals to some extent and making sure there's agreement on them. You know, what do you call when you're all rowing the same direction, so to speak?
Well, I really appreciate the willingness to put that on. I think it's because of the evolution of steering and what it does. And when you control what's on the agenda or not, you eventually control what ends up happening. And that's why I think for me, Stephen and Jack, I appreciated your leadership. And Tank, I'm so glad you're here, even though you're not on steering. But I just think that that's really important that we look at who's in that room and then what's going to give us the best outcomes. And if we have an opportunity to improve or get some voices in here, on a regular basis, right? And for people that can carve that out, I think that's only going to make us better, make our agendas better, and be more inclusive in our process.
Thanks for bringing that up, Mike. Okay, so I think Jill has what she needs so far for the next task force agenda. And if anybody, I guess we have a few days at least, if anybody gets a bolt of neural electricity, you can send it Jill's way in the next few days. So is there any other business to be conducted? I see no hands. And so Jill, would you ask for public comment? I guess that's just Jackie, but.
Yeah, thank you. And not even Jackie, it looks like we don't have any attendees either virtually or in our conference room.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for making it here. Just a reminder, November 14th task force meeting, evening of November 15th, the SAC town hall listening session for the community. And a couple of committee meetings thrown in there to boot. All right, we're adjourned. Take care.
Stephen and Jack, if you could hang back.